Undistracted. It is an absolute pleasure to have Paul Taylor, author of Death by Comfort, joining us. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Hope you're well.
You too. And the first question I have to ask is, what are some of the signs you see in our world, our lives, that say we are being killed by comfort?
Look, there's a number of different things, right, that show up. So there's psychologically and physically. So physically, it's the sort of stuff that you see, the typical ill health, right? Your metabolism isn't running well. You can be putting on weight, which is not the way that us humans are supposed to be. Your blood glucose can go up, those sorts of things. Blood pressure goes up. And then psychologically, you just lost your mojo. Right. It's that. And it can be particularly when we're not doing the things we're supposed to be doing. And when you combine that with being exposed to the myriad of modern stressors that we have that switch on these stress response systems that are supposed to be emergency systems, when they're turned on for long periods of time, they destroy our health metabolically, and then psychologically, they can then have an impact on our mood and our energy levels. And I guess the other thing that you see is sleep being impaired, that you're struggling to get to sleep, or you're waking up and you're not feeling invigorated. They are all of the signs collectively that something's going wrong. And it's generally we're leading a life that is a mismatch with our hunter-gatherer's genome.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit about that, because when we talk about our genome, when we talk about the early life that humans would have lived, hunting, gathering, it really is such a departure from how we live right now. What's the issue with that disconnect?
Well, so the issue is that our genome is still a hunter-gatherer's genome. There have not been any major changes in the genome in the last 45,000 years, other than being able to process lactose milk products, dairy products, after the weaning period, right? So that's an adaptation that we've had from that hunting and gathering. But essentially, our genome expects us to move lots, to eat natural foods, to be socially connected, and then to have these intermittent exposure to stressors and then recovery. And then when you take that genome and you plonk it into this modern, fast-paced life where we actually don't move very much at all, we eat shit food a lot of the time, and we are digitally connected and socially disconnected, and we tend to be stressed because we have lots of these modern stressors, and we're not spending lots of time recovering and socializing and those sorts of things that humans are supposed to be doing.
So can our genome catch up, do you think, with where our modern lives are? Or is that process just going to take too long and we kind of have to find ways to work through the fact that we are so far from the original life we would have lived?
Definitely the latter, because changes in the genome take multiple generations, right? Multiple, like it can take thousands of years. So what we've got to do, and we can't all become hunter-gatherers, that's not the point of my book. The thing is that we need to make a series of small but subtle changes in our lives that more mirror those things. So getting the best bang for your buck. So let me give you a really potent example. Exercise. We know from recent studies, a bunch of Harvard researchers studied the Hadza in East Africa, in Tanzania. They are one of the last true hunter-gatherer tribes on earth. At the time of the study, I think it was 2016, 2017, 90% of all the food they ate, they got from hunting and gathering. So this is the best snapshot as to what our genome is supposed to do. Turns out that Hadza women do about 13,500 steps a day. Hadza men, 18,500 steps a day. But it's not just about the steps. They measured their heart rate. So they looking at the intensity of the exercise they did. And it turns out they did 135 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every day. Right? That's 945 a week. That is about 7 times the amount of the average Aussie. They do as much moderate to vigorous physical activity in a day as we would do in a week. Right? And when you understand the impact that exercise has on your biology and disease protection, it starts to become very clear why we're getting both physical and mental diseases. A lot of it is to do with exercise. So I talk about getting the best bang for your buck in exercise, right? Anybody's got any kind of a tracker No, it's reasonably hard. An office job where you're sitting, it's pretty hard to get 10,000 steps a day. Getting
Yeah.
13 and a half or 18,000 steps a day is really hard unless you've got a chunk of time to dedicate towards exercise. That's
Mm.
where intensity comes in. That's where doing high intensity interval training, right? Lifting weights, those sorts of things that give you the best bang for your buck, the best return on investment in exercise. That's pretty key. And then there's other things around exercise, sleep, all of those sorts of things. Or sorry,
No, no.
food and sleep.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say with that too that I think one of the challenges of the modern world is that we are so time poor. So when you have people realizing that we're not moving enough, that we just do have these desk jobs that mean we're inside so much, the idea of having to carve out big chunks of time to get the exercise in that we need to exhaust ourselves to a degree, I suppose, that
Mm.
maybe, feels a little bit overwhelming.
Absolutely. So this is about, and for me, get it done in the morning, right? Just carve out 20 minutes, do some high intensity interval training. If you don't have 20 minutes, do 10. And then I talk a lot about movement snacks, that every half hour, if you can, is get off your arse and move, right? Run up and down the stairs. I have kettlebells and club bells sitting right behind my desk, and I'll get up and do kettlebell swings. Just 30 seconds to a minute of vigorous activity has actually been shown now to enhance your lifespan and improve your metabolic health. So we've got to get out of this concept that I need to go to the gym to exercise, or I need an hour to exercise. Every little minute counts, every 30 seconds. And that way you'll accumulate a huge amount. Like when the TV's on, if you're watching TV, the adverts come on, get up and exercise rather than sitting on your arse watching crap adverts.
Hmm. Don't skip the ads on YouTube. Use that moment to actually do a
Yes,
little bit of exercise.
exactly. Boom.
And key to your book, of course, is this idea of moving away from wanting everything to be comfortable, wanting everything to be easy, embracing a little bit of stress. Why
Yeah.
is that mentality so important?
Well, if you think about one of the things or a couple of things that you're most proud of in your life, right? It's, something that you're really proud of having achieved it. For most people, it involves stress and being out of your comfort zone. That is where we grow. That is where we grow both physically and psychologically. So from a physical perspective, exercise is only good for you because it's a stressor. And it's the stress of exercise that stimulates adaptation. It stimulates growth. You get bigger, faster, stronger. Psychologically, it's quite similar, right? That when we're uncomfortable, we need to hang with the tension, right? Psychologists call that the zone of productive disequilibrium, which
Mm.
means you're out of your comfort zone, but it's productive if you hang with the tension long enough for you to adapt, right? And there's a lot of talk in the research about post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a very, very real thing. But also emerging now in the research is stuff called post-traumatic growth. And when
Mm.
people go through even traumatic experiences, they can grow because of those experiences. And then when you've been through that stressful, really stressful period, you actually know that you have that capacity and you're building that capacity. But there's a crossover with all of these things. So I talked about exercise. There's research that shows that people who are fitter can handle more psychological stress, right?
Yeah.
So there's this crossover effect. We know that when you expose yourself to cold water deliberately, not only does it improve your mood, but it improves your metabolic health as well, right? And can actually, some of the research emerging showing that it can combat depression. And we know that heat exposures from either a sauna or 20 minutes in a hot bath can cause those metabolic adaptations and improve your physiology and your psychology as well. So it's deliberately exposing ourselves to short or moderate amounts of stressors and then recovering. That's when we grow.
Mm. And you do make the important distinction between stress that is destructive and stress that it's positive. And it is that ability for us to come away from something having recovered well. That the difference between it being, say, a post traumatic stress disorder and post traumatic growth, what do you think delineates between somebody who's going to have experienced a trauma experience and
Yeah.
someone who sees that challenge as one that has grown them?
Right. So there's a couple of things. It's a really, really interesting point. So one is your capacity going in, right? Have I trained my system? And that's why I'm really big on kids, and that we need to expose our kids to stress followed by recovery and teach them how to learn from that. Then another thing is how you psychologically frame something. So when you're going into something that's potentially stressful, if you view it as threatening and a loss and stressful, it activates a certain part of your stress response system called your HPA axis that involves the hormone cortisol that can be really destructive. Whereas if you view this thing as a challenge, it activates your fight or flight system. That is nature's way of dealing with stuff, right? So how you psychologically frame stuff is hugely important. And the Stoic philosophers, and I talk about them in my book, they talked about that these big challenges that are really hard to overcome are just an opportunity to sharpen our character or to practice a virtue. And if you look at the roots of the word character, it is to do with the mark that's left by a chisel, right? So it's that stuff that shapes us. We get character from going through stress and actually using that to actually help us grow. So the psychology is hugely important, as well as the recovery on the other side. So if we're both going through stressful events, the exact same thing, if I'm dealing with that stress by coming home and drinking alcohol or taking drugs or eating shit food, I'm going to be degrading my capacity. Whereas if you're dealing with that stress by coming home and doing some exercise that's going to burn up those stress hormones and eating well and doing some breath work or meditation before you go to bed and getting good sleep, whereas I'm getting shit sleep, that is very, very different, right? So it is how you are supporting yourself to deal with it. And I like to say, if you're going through stress, you need to think of yourself as an athlete going to the Olympics, right? And your recovery strategies are hugely important. And viewing that as a challenge rather than a stressor is the other thing that's hugely important.
So when you say recovery, you're talking about recovering from stressful incidents, or are you talking about physical recovery, like you've done, a hard session at the gym and you need to have those days of rest to balance it?
It's both of those things, right? And if you're doing a hard day's work, right? So a lot of people, they go in there and they come home from work and they're shattered. And that's because you're using your brain a lot. If you're having difficult meetings and stuff like that, and you always have to be on, your brain is about 2 to 3% of your body's weight, but it uses 25 to 30% of your glucose, right? So it's like you've run a marathon. And that's why you got to come home and do short bursts of exercise. So one thing I'm a big fan of, and I always do it, whenever I come home, I get changed into my exercise gear, right? A lot of people, when they come home, what do they get changed into?
PJs always.
PJs. So what's the psychological priming, right? You get into PJs, what's that telling you to do? Sit on your arse, relax. You're more likely to have a glass of wine or a beer, those sorts of things. Whereas if you come home and you get changed into your exercise gear, there's a psychological priming, and it shows people will actually move more, right? And then you can do maybe a couple of minutes exercise, even if you don't feel like a workout, and then you'll feel, oh, I feel a little bit better and I might do a bit more, right? So it's recovery from that, but also psychological recovery. So this is where meditation comes in. And if you're not into meditating, do breath work, right? So box breathing, you can do resonant frequency breathing. So box breathing is you breathe like the sides of a box for a couple of minutes. So breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Or resonant frequency breathing is for most people about 10 breaths a minute. Breathe in for 3 or 4, out for 6 or 7, and just do that for a few minutes, and it brings your brain out of a stress state, right? That's a much better way of dealing with a stressful day than coming home and drinking alcohol or eating shit food.
Yeah, I really like that idea of getting into the active wear, your exercise gear when you get home, because I know it tends to be once you get home, you just switch off and you think, okay, here's the next few hours until I get to bedtime, get to the next morning. But I feel like that really is something so simple that would keep you switched on. So it's not just a waste of an afternoon or an evening.
Absolutely. And it's what I call an enabling behavior, right? So you're getting in, so you're doing a little positive thing, but then it's the psychological priming that enables you to do more movement. And it really is important. So, and then you do, okay, so I'll do a week of just getting into my exercise gear. And then I'll do a week of, I get into my exercise gear and I'm going to do 30 squats or push-ups or something like that. And you find it lifts your energy. It really does.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this interview. Make sure you subscribe to Hope 1032's YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date on all our latest content. But until then, watch any of these videos and enjoy.